Hey there, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. If you're new here, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Today's episode, we're going to talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine. Um, she was a medieval queen, and she was pretty awesome. So, if you're first time here, well, medieval history is my favorite time in history, so I've been diving into that for years, especially the women involved in medieval history because their stories aren't often told. And so I'm going to be covering a lot of medieval women and early age women, from the ancient histories and things like that as well. Um, but I wanted to give Eleanor her own episode before we jump into her second husband. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Because she's amazing in her own right, not just because of the men she was connected to. She was the wife of two kings, she was the mother of kings, the grandmother of kings, and queens and princesses and everything. But she had a miraculous life, and I even want to talk about, like, her aside from being a mother as well, just Eleanor herself, because she was quite something. She was very, very smart, and I hope I can convey that in this episode. The art piece I'm going to work on today is out of a coloring book. It's very AI generated. You can tell when you look at the ears and everything. I got it out of this coloring book, Royalty adult coloring book. And it's okay, but we'll like Alexander the Great here. Okay, alright, dude on a horse. But the dude has no legs. Like, it's just a torso, and it stops there, and then it turns into the saddle of the horse and everything. And he also has 6 fingers. So, we're doing the best we can. But since I did Empress Matilda from the same coloring book, I wanted to continue that for Eleanor. Because despite it being AI, it's still kind of better than I could draw. And just, I even had to look myself to make sure they weren't the same picture. But if we don't remember, this is Empress Matilda, and then this is Eleanor of Aquitaine. So, I thought they looked pretty close at first, so I had to make sure I wasn't coloring the same picture, because occasionally in some of these coloring books I've noticed they'll slip the same picture in a couple of times, or a couple of different pictures will be duplicates in there. So just got to watch out for that. And I don't want to do the same art piece that I've done prior unless it's like I'm continuing working on something, but I don't want to do duplicates. Anyway, so if you've noticed, I've changed my backing to black. I felt like the light was bouncing off too much, and I felt like the art kind of got lost, especially using the white as like a color tester and everything. The more color there got on there, the more distracting it was from the actual art piece. And I feel like this kind of helps with absorbing the light a little bit better. So hopefully it looks better to you guys too, and my camera can focus a little better on it. All right, so let's jump into Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was born sometime in 1124. Something about back then is like they didn't always write down what we would consider important special occasions. Dates of birth, exact dates of birth for girls especially, weren't really kept track of too much. I mean, maybe then, in her time, it would have been easy for somebody to tell you the exact day and month she was born on, but it's kind of disputed. Like, it's accepted she was born in 1124, but some people think maybe even as early as 1122. But 1124 is what I saw the most evidence for, so that's what I'm going to go with this time. But if you believe it's 1122, that's cool. I don't disagree that it's totally possible. Anyway, so her parents were William the 10th, Duke of Aquitaine, and her mother was Eleanor, which is, it wasn't uncommon for girls to be named after mothers and grandmothers back then. So the fact that she named her daughter pretty much after herself is definitely not uncommon. We'll discuss that a lot more in other episodes, especially Queen Isabel of Castile. We're gonna dive deep into that one. Woo! I've got some things to say. Like, she was pretty amazing. And anyway, we'll talk about her later. Today is Eleanor's day. It's her episode. So she was born to Eleanor de Châteauroux. I do not speak any French, so I'm going to butcher a lot of this, and I'm very sorry if there are any French speakers or whatever. I am terribly sorry, and I'm trying my best with my American Southern tongue. But please, I mean, feel free to roast me in the comments. I'll get a laugh out of that. Not in a condescending way, but in a I totally agree with you, I sound terrible way. And I'll laugh with you. How about that? Alright, so back to Eleanor. And like I said, I wanted to give her her own episode because she's important, very important in her own right, despite the men she's connected to throughout her life. And she only succeeds in making herself more important the older she gets. She's very, very smart. And I guess really there's something, you know, we should discuss about Aquitaine before we get into it. It helps to know. Aquitaine is basically during Eleanor's time anyway, Aquitaine would have been a very, very large chunk of southern France. And so to be the daughter of the Duke of that much land, because that was bigger than a bigger territory than what the King of France claimed. You know, the Dukes of Aquitaine and like Normandy and Anjou and Blois, they were vassals of the French king, but they were, during this time especially, much wealthier than him and held much more land. So, you know, the Aquitanians were a southern France location country. It's very like sunny and warm there, so that's where a lot of the best wines come from. They have, you know, the vineyards and things like that. So it's a very wealthy country as well. They call it a duchy, which makes sense because there's a duke, and if there's a duke, there's a duchess. So you can kind of see how there's all of those are connected. Like an earl has an earldom, and a bishop has a bishopric, and things like that. You know, it's just words for saying this is mine. So anyway, I'm sorry, my table is shaking around a lot. As well as being a very wealthy region, they were also very like open-minded, and while I will say yes, religious, not as stuffy as other regions were, not as pious. They believed a lot in like leisure and art and studying and education and, you know, romantic love and all that. So kind of a laid back society in general, as a general whole. And because of that, They were a thorn in the side of the French king and the Pope and all of those super pious and devout Catholics at the time. And the dukes of Aquitaine were like constantly being excommunicated by the Pope. And they really didn't care that much. And the rest of Aquitaine didn't really care that much. So, I mean, it was an inconvenience, but it wasn't like the religious rebuke that a lot of other people would have taken it as back then. So it didn't hold much sway. And the Aquitanians were, like I said, pretty laid back and easygoing, except for during war. When they felt like there was something to fight over, they would. So they weren't like, you know, scared of conflict at all. They were just very like, yeah, you know, they don't really care who they anger. Which it can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, you know. You just, you got to pick your battles. And they picked battle a lot. So they weren't everyone's favorite, but they were rich. It was a large amount of land. It was a large population. And, you know, when things were good with the king or the Pope, you know, they benefited from the Aquitanians too, with the wine and the money that flowed and the, you know, art and tapestry and textile and all of that Aquitaine generated, and a rather large army and just all those. So there were benefits to Aquitaine, many benefits, which is why they kind of got away with the stuff they got away with. So let's blend in Eleanor's hair. We don't really know what Eleanor looked like. I'm just trying to go like different than what I made Matilda, because I don't want them to turn out looking exactly alike, where I end up doing two art pieces that look so similar. And since I gave her brown hair, I'm just giving Eleanor the, like, I'm trying to do like a dark honey blonde or something. I may put a little bit of red in there to make it more of a strawberry blonde. I don't know. We'll see what it looks like once I get this blended. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have to remind myself a lot that I'm on camera, and when I drag it out of camera sight, y'all can't see me, and I'm so sorry. I'm still learning. Okay, so Eleanor is born in 1124 to her parents. She's the eldest child. She's the first baby that we know of. I mean, there may have been more that didn't make it. Not sure. And then she has a younger sister, Petronella, which we'll talk about her later. She's a firecracker too. Sometimes not in the best way. Sometimes it's in a detrimental way. But, you know, the lifestyles of the rich and famous. And then she has a baby brother who is named William as well. And, you know, all is well. During her childhood, she would have been probably going between being educated in convents and maybe at home or in a household for a while with tutors and a governess. But she was still quite young at this age, so she wasn't, you know, she was being educated, but not like super extensively yet. That kind of put some fire in her hair, didn't it? So, you know, she is not, because of her baby brother, she's not the heir of the lands, because, you know, they went to the eldest son. It didn't matter how many older daughters you had, it went to the eldest son. And then when William was about 4, let me look at my notes. I'm sorry. I want to say, yeah, Eleanor was 6. In 1130 is whenever Eleanor and William, the baby, her little brother, died, they got ill around the same time, and it seemed to be something that, like, you know, just a sudden illness that they were sick and then they died, and there wasn't much that anybody could do to intervene. So that's the impression I got from the sources that I was looking at. But, you know, who knows, back then it's 1100, so it's over 1,000 years ago, and we're not going to know every little detail of that. Okay. I'm giving her some more brown, hoping that will give it some, kind of tone it down on the brassiness a little bit and give it a little more depth. Alright, so once her little brother dies and her mother dies, you know, that's a tragedy. They did seem to be, I suppose from the records it seems like they were a generally happy family. Like, you know, the Duke did love his wife, but the Aquitanians were, especially the men, were famous for having a wife and, you know, several mistresses. Especially the richer the dude, the more mistresses he would have, you know. There we go. Okay. I was trying to use the green as some shading, which it kind of worked, but it still seems a little too green to me. So I'm going to go back over it with the peach and blend it in a little more. So luckily, in Aquitaine, they didn't have a rule specifically saying girls could not inherit. It was just that, you know, if there was a boy, it didn't matter if he was older or younger, he was the one that was going to inherit. So that was just the rule. But now the boy was gone, and it was Eleanor and her father and her little sister Petronella. And, you know, the Duke was not that old at this point. He probably would have been, you know, it seems like maybe he was in his 30s or so. And he could have remarried and tried for more sons, but he never did. And he did name Eleanor his heir. That doesn't work, so I need to get rid of it. I wanted to do something different than what I did. Let's do seafoam green. I hope this works. Yeah, okay. So he wanted to do, you know, to let Eleanor be his heir apparent. You know, he didn't outright name her the heir. I think that was to give the other higher ups around the area and his advisors and everything the hope that he would one day remarry, because they certainly tried and encouraged him for years to remarry and try to produce a male heir, and he just didn't. So he had Eleanor and Petronella both extremely well educated for the time and for having girls educated. I mean, girls of higher nobility during that time and even royalty, they might not have even have been taught to read and write, but it seems like Eleanor could both read and write, and she spoke multiple languages. So William had her extensively educated, not only for the times, but because, you know, she was a girl and it wouldn't have been expected to teach her more than reading and writing, maybe, so she could run a household, and then the rest would have been considered the feminine arts, like dancing, singing, sewing, spinning, you know, all that kind of stuff. And she was taught all of that. She was taught the women's work of the time, of course, and she did all of the singing and dancing. She was very feminine, you know, like she didn't really have a choice, but it seems like she embraced it, and accepted it. And so, you know, most places are barely even educating their daughters, much less to the extent that William had her educated. But she was taught arithmetic and history, Latin, Norman French, um, English, and they think a couple of other languages, though they're not exactly sure, the sources that I looked into, and constellations, literature, writing, hawking, hunting, so all of those things. And she loved to do all those things. She was very athletic and known even into her older age to ride and hunt and hawk a lot, especially after she had, right after she had a baby, she would ride a lot to try and, you know, get exercise and all that. But we'll get into that later. Does that look okay? I don't know if you can even tell in there. And so, you know, William would have her present at like council meetings and everything. So it really did seem like he was preparing her to take over because he wasn't remarrying, he wasn't trying for sons, and he was educating her so extensively. And I think that he realized how smart she was, and that, you know, it would be hard for her as a woman, but she could do it. And he took her all over with him, all over his lands. And so, you know, people got to know her, and just adored her. So she was well loved by her people and her father. She was well educated and, you know, just had all that going for her. So lucky Eleanor. But, you know, she was extremely, you know, what's the word I'm looking for here? She was very strategic in her, you know, planning and the way she would live her life for the rest of her life. And sometimes it didn't always work out, but most of the time it did. She was very, very intelligent. And I admire her a lot because of the times that she had to deal with where women were, you know, not even considered full citizens or full human beings, and even a queen can be treated badly, you know. So when Eleanor was 13, she and her sister were left in the care of Archbishop of Bordeaux, who was one of Duke William's, like, loyal vassals, very, very close to him, a trusted council member and everything, because, well, something else that was very common in this day and age at the time were kidnapping, like a rich heiress and forcing them to marry you. And, you know, Eleanor's 13, and they sure were marrying kids off at that age back then. So he wanted her to be safe because he had to go. Him and the Pope had kind of kissed and made up and were trying to resolve their issues. And part of him getting reinstated with the church involved him going to the St. James Cathedral in Compostela. That's in Spain. And so he left the girls with the Archbishop while he was going to go on this, like, pilgrimage of repentance and everything. And and it's a good thing that he left them with somebody he could trust, because when he got to Compostela, he just died. Like, I couldn't really find why they thought perhaps it was like a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. And so he just died. And that made Eleanor the richest, most important person, not only in the duchy, but France itself. And it also made her a target for kidnapping and marrying. And that was very, very common. And one thing, I guess William had some forewarning that he was going to die. So I'm assuming that he got like very, very ill. It doesn't, nothing in the sources or stories I've ever heard about it does it say he was like injured or anything. It just seemed that he was taken ill suddenly. But he had enough forewarning to know he was going to die to leave a will. And he wrote a will where, even though he had a tenuous relationship with the King of France, he left the care of his daughters to King Louis, because Louis the Sixth was going to make sure that his most productive and wealthiest duchy in his holdings was going to be in good hands, because that's where he gets a lot of his money and wine and luxuries and all that from. So he doesn't want anybody coming in and, you know, just anyone taking over the duchy. Because, well, even though Eleanor was going to be the duchess and, you know, inherit it, pretty much back then women abdicated their power to their husbands. If they had power in their own right, once they were married, it was abdicated over to their husbands. And that's usually how it worked. And usually the citizens of said country or duchy or whatever were happier if, even if they didn't like the man, they still didn't really want the woman running things. We'll see how that goes in Aquitaine in a little while. So, you know, William leaves the care of his daughters in King Louis's hands, and Louis the Sixth was, I don't know, I sort of think of him as like King Robert on Game of Thrones. He was called Louis the Fat, but not because of that, but because, well, except for Robert wasn't pious. I guess, like, more self-interested like Robert was, because Robert really couldn't see red flags for his own self-interest and everything. That's why he didn't see everything that was going on with Jaime and Cersei. But anyway, we'll talk about that another time. So, Louis was already himself about to die, and he knew it. He had been ailing for a long time, and he knew he was very sick and didn't have long to live. But this fantastic news that the Duke of Aquitaine was dead, and now the power lied within the grasp of a young, unmarried, eligible to be married young woman, was fantastic for him, because he just happened to have the perfect groom for her. And who was this groom? His own son, Louis, which would effectively mean that the territory of Aquitaine then becomes the territory of the crown, because the husband takes the power, right? So, you know, not long, just like a couple of months, because, you know, it takes news time to travel back then. But like a couple of months after William dies, Louis has already arranged for his son, Louis the Seventh, to marry his daughter. Now, just a little bit about Louis the Seventh. So, if Eleanor is Barbie, then Louis is Ken. His job is king. And he was actually the second son of Louis VI. But the first son, Philip, died. And so Louis, being the second son, had been put in a monastery at a very young age. He was meant to become like an archbishop or something and aid his king brother in spiritual advice and all that kind of stuff. But Philip dies, and so Louis is yanked out of the monastery, and he is brought, to Paris to become prepared to become a king. And so he is like terrified, and he is 17 at this time, so he's just a kid too, and just, like, he is the son of the king, and he has to, after being prepared his whole life to be a man of the cloth, which seemed to actually suit him, like he seemed very keen on it. Then he's yanked out and told, no, instead, you're going to rule an entire country, and you have to be prepared to be a king. And so we'll give Louis some grace there. I do believe that was probably a shock to a child, and who had been told something his whole life, and now that's changing, which, I mean, of course he would have known growing up, because he would have been told over and over and over, if your brother dies without issue, you will then be king. But he probably didn't think it was going to happen, especially if he was living in a monastery. He probably wasn't seeing Philip that much, so he probably didn't really know him that well either. It is hard to say, because we don't have, like, their official thoughts and everything written down. So hard to say about that for sure, but I'm sure he would have thought, like, oh, I'm just gonna be in the church and I'll help my brother and probably see him more once we're older and grown and in charge, but for now he's gonna be the king and I'm gonna be involved in the church. And probably as the son of the king, he would have ended up in a higher position once he finished his novice era at the monastery. But he didn't get that chance, and he was yanked out, taken back to France, and told, be prepared to be king. And be prepared soon, because your father is dying. So, very shocking for a kid. Very, I'm sure, like, disruptive, and they didn't really focus on mental health back then, so they wouldn't have been expected to give any time to adjust to that or anything. He just would have been expected to jump into the role and be ready to go at a moment's notice. And that is exactly what happened. His brother died. He was yanked out of the monastery and told, you're king now, after your father dies, which will be soon. So, it wasn't much time at all before Louis arranged for his son to marry Eleanor, and they did just that. They were married that same year, 1130. Let me catch up in my notes here. It's said that Louis was, like, madly in love with Eleanor. He adored her. I'm sure she was his complete opposite. She was very outgoing and sociable, and she had been raised in the spotlight. She was used to getting lots of attention and lots of praise, being told how beautiful she was and all of the things, because that was very how it was in that time, where the especially the Duchess, you want to get in good with the Duchess, no matter how old she is, whether she's 15 or 50. And Louis was very much like, he just came from a convent. He is very, very reserved. He is terrified. He really doesn't, he's not worldly. He's not well-traveled. He's not well-spoken. He's mainly been raised around men, and so he doesn't know anything about women, and all of that. So it was probably a bit of a shock for both of them when they first met, but they both did, as young as they were, seem to like accept that this was their lot, was gonna be their duty and their, whole purpose and everything, and blah blah blah, all the, all the things that are said to children of noble birth and royalty in this time. And they did seem genuinely like accepting of it. They liked each other, and all that. But I do think being so young, and both of them were very young and very naive, and I think that Louis thought that Eleanor was going to, once they got married, she was going to just fall into this role of pious, quiet, reserved woman. And I think that Eleanor thought that once Louis became king, he would loosen up a bit. And once they got a little bit older and could make decisions for themselves without, someone around to tell them no, or to tell them what to do in general, because at this point, her father-in-law is the king, and so she's just a duchess and a princess. But like 6 weeks or so after they get married, Louis dies, and young Louis becomes king, and they were in her lands when that happened, and so that they had to rush back to Paris and just assume the role of, as children, of ruling a country. And part of the problem with that was the Aquitanians. They were very unruly. They did not want to listen to Louis, and they only took orders from Eleanor. And she took it very seriously, because something she did, and I couldn't find in the sources who was responsible for this, if Eleanor demanded it, because she would have been anywhere from 13 to 15 years old, so I don't know if she would have. But it must have been something negotiated in her marriage contract that the lands of Aquitaine would not be under royal control until their son and heir, whoever became king, after Louis, once he became king, after Louis died, then Aquitaine would come under the rule of the French king, because he would be also an Aquitanian. And that was the negotiation worked out between them. And, well, I doubt between them. I bet between Louis, his advisors, and the Archbishop that was entrusted with their care and everything. So, and probably even sometime, like William, before he died, worked it out in such a way or something. I don't know, maybe. But somebody had Eleanor and Aquitaine's best interest at heart there. And that becomes very important later. Okay. So, anyway, like I said, that's their little agreement at the moment. Which I doubt either one of the kids, Eleanor and Louis, I'm going to call them the kids, because they're children. I doubt the kids had much say in it, but that's the agreement. So Eleanor and Louis head back to Paris to start the business of becoming rulers and producing a family and all the things. And, Eleanor was richer than the king was. So a lot of the histories and even contemporary reports from back then complain about the money she spent, because she loved fine things. She loved expensive things, luxury items, furniture, clothes, perfume, extravagant parties, all of that stuff. Nice horses and hawks and everything. And people then and now complain about how much money Eleanor spent. But what they fail to mention is that she was spending her own damn money. And because sexists now and then don't consider it her money, it becomes Louis's money because he married her and everything goes to the man. Like, they don't ever put that into a perspective I like. And I would just like to clear that up right now, that yeah, she probably was spending money, but it was all being produced by her duchy. That was her income she received from Aquitaine that she was spending. And they just didn't like it because they were a bunch of stuffy, like, super pious, mostly old, crusty churchmen and everything. And Eleanor, she enjoyed, music and parties and, like, lectures because Paris, is Paris. So there's, of course, a ton of, like, art and theater and, science and all of that going on. And she wanted, artists and, theologians and historians and everything to come to the palace and give her and her ladies, like, lectures and discussions and things like that. And, of course, Louis and his, advisors and everything were like, oh, no, that's heresy. And, you need to focus on just having babies. Like, forget about all this learning and education and, all that stuff. Forget about art and jewelry and fashion and all the things you love. You need to concentrate on having babies. And I think Eleanor did want to have babies, but it wasn't her fault. And we know this for a fact because Louis was so pious, he could not have, like, regular sexual encounters with her. And this is ongoing for years. Like, by this time, they're probably, like, she's probably around 19 or 20, and he is probably, he's a few years older than her. He's like 4 years older than her. So he's probably like 24 or so. And they still don't have any children. And that is because Louis is not down, because he, as a super religious, should have been a monk guy, he has all of these, like, we cannot have sex on feast days, we cannot have sex on Sundays, we cannot have sex on Wednesdays, we cannot have sex on, and he had so many rules around when he wasn't allowed to be with her. And then when he was allowed to, he just would not come to her room. He wouldn't show up. And, she found this incredibly frustrating because she comes from the land of like, love and passion. And, men show their unrequited love with poetry and, passion and gifts. And they tell them they love them and all that. And Louis did love her, but he had that good old-fashioned church shame instilled in him, and he thought his love for his wife was a sin. And so when they did have sex, he would go off and, like, pray for hours to repent. And, even his own advisors told him, like, you need to produce an heir. You have to get over this and produce an heir. And he would go be with her for one time, and then it would be, months and months and months before he would try again. So, it didn't happen there for a while. And the more the babies didn't arrive, and the more money she spent and the border she got, because she was like a caged animal and she was just circling her prison, like, the more they blamed her for no heirs and the stresses of the kingdom, and the Aquitanians being unruly and not listening to any of the French that would be sent down, and they would only take orders from Eleanor, and all of it. It was just always her fault, all her fault. And there is one incident we'll talk about here in a bit that probably was her fault and her sister's, and it caused a lot of extra crap that didn't need to be going on at the time, but it is what it is. So, by this time, they're a few years into the marriage. Things aren't going how anybody expected. Everybody's frustrated and, stressed. And because, I imagine being a teen king is very difficult. And especially when you weren't ever really prepared for the role, but you were expected to just take over seamlessly with no problems. And that is rough. So I'm sorry to Louis for that, because that is a extreme, unimaginable stress, literal lives in your hands. And being super pious and always having to ask God before you can even go to the bathroom probably complicates things for everyone too, because people would get frustrated with Louis. He could never make an actual decision right away because he had to go pray on it, ask God, and sometimes he would take hours or days or weeks or whatever, and he was quite indecisive there when he was younger. So Louis, has his own issues going on. So we're going to fast forward, like I said, a few years after they've been married. They're both in their, mid to younger 20s now. Now, even though Louis was extremely pious and religious and everything, he still had his issues with the Pope of Rome that caused him trouble. And one of the things is Louis wanted one of his fellas to be appointed to a vacancy in the Archbishopric of Bourges, and the Pope wanted his own guy. And because of the previous Pope and Eleanor's father, again, not her fault, people blamed her for the spat between Louis and the Pope, which really was their own thing. But everybody, every time Louis did something wrong, it was Eleanor's fault. And that probably didn't help Louis think that, he could do any wrong. It's just everything he wanted to do ended up turning out wrong because somehow Eleanor, I guess, sabotaged him in some way, even though she really probably couldn't have. But, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was off camera for all of that. But, she really couldn't have done much because she wouldn't have had much influence inside the strategy rooms and everything. And at this point, I don't know how much Louis was even really telling her. But among his advisors and just people in general in France, Louis was, a sweet boy who could do no wrong, and everything that went wrong was Eleanor's fault. And she spent too much of her own money, but they quite frequently leave off her own part. I think they do that on purpose because it makes her seem like she's irresponsible and everything, but we know for a fact that Louis used Aquitaine a lot. Its armies, its money, and everything. Eleanor did give him money and armies and things like that to try and fulfill his agenda and everything. So it's not as if he had no access to it. He pretty much, she would give him whatever he wanted as long as she agreed. But if she didn't agree, she would make it difficult for him because they wouldn't provide anything that she didn't command them to, which I think is pretty funny, actually. And it was a great source of tension between the two of them, because she found it probably rather amusing that they wouldn't do anything without coming to her first. And I'm sure Louis found it not only annoying but emasculating that they would prefer to be ruled by a woman than a man. But that was just the way the Aquitanians was. For them, it wasn't about her being a woman and him being a man. It was about her being an Aquitanian and him not. So it was more about like, she's one of us, and that's why we only listen to her. So, but Louis, even if he did understand that, he didn't like it. And so he got into squabbles with a lot of the nobility of Aquitaine quite often, and Eleanor would have to come in and, solve it or whatever. Now, at some point, let me see if I can find the year here, she does give birth to a daughter. She does have a daughter, Marie. And, at first everybody is really excited and everything that she's pregnant, of course, and everybody's saying it's going to be a son, yada yada blah blah, and then she's born and it's a girl. And, well, that was Eleanor's fault. Boo-hoo. I think Eleanor was probably secretly happy about this, because even though she was scorned for not producing a male heir, she got to maintain control of her lands. And Aquitaine was extremely important to Eleanor, and she made a point to, sometimes she would just not cooperate with Louis and give him whatever he wanted in her lands, just to please, whatever person she wanted to where she was from, so that she could keep them in her pocket. And it worked out really well, because they felt like, she had their best interest at heart, which she did. She cared very much, and she wasn't going to let Louis or his advisors take anything from Aquitaine without her giving it to him. And if she didn't want to give it to him, she just didn't. Okay, I think I'm going to use paint pens here, just to fancy it up some. So, the Pope and Louis are fighting, and then at the same time, there's a second event going on that is Eleanor's, well, it's partially her fault. She is responsible. She's heavily involved, and she is probably in the wrong in this instance. Her younger sister, Petronella, is having an affair with a married man. I have his name here. Raoul I, the Count of Vermandois. And he is much older than Petronella, because she is in her very early 20s at this point, and this man is in his, 50s, I think. I saw, 40s, 50s in different sources and everything. That's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that he is already married and has been for quite a long time and has children, and he wants to set his wife aside and marry Petronella. And what would happen there is his wife would probably be sent to a convent, whether she wanted to or not. And he probably just expected her to accept this and go lightly, but she didn't. If she had the nerve to be kind of pissed off about it, and Petronella and Raoul were like, "What? Why? What's wrong? Oh my gosh!" But anyway, so Raoul's wife is also named Eleanor, but she is Eleanor of Champagne. She's from Champagne, France. Yes, where champagne comes from. So she is pretty pissed off, and she goes home where she's from to her brother, Theobald of Champagne. And he is Theobald, I guess. Theobald. Yeah. Anyway, so this is around 1142. And, she goes home to her brother, Theobald, and is like, can you believe this jackass? What he's asking. And Theobald is like, actually, no, I can't. And I'm very insulted on your behalf. And I'm gonna, like, totally fight for your honor, sis. And she's like, cool. Excellent. That would be great because I would like my house back. And, this little homewrecker's not going to come in here and turn my life upside down. And Theobald was like, absolutely not. We're going to war. And that's what they do. Who do they go to war with? Well, of course, Raoul, but also the King of France, because Petronilla is the mistress in all of this, and this is all because of her and on her behalf, and Eleanor talks Louis into fighting on Raoul's side. You guys, this is literally a war that goes on for years, and it is fought because some dude wants to, like, set his wife aside so he can marry his hot young mistress, who's also incredibly rich and has some, not as many as Eleanor, of course, but some land holdings in Aquitaine, of course. And so he would definitely want to, nab that. And should Eleanor die, Petronilla would become the heiress of Aquitaine, which I don't know why Eleanor didn't consider that. Like, had that happened, then Petronilla gets everything, which means Raoul gets everything. I might not have been advocating for my own hunting accident or whatever. Anyway, so she gets Louis to fight on Raoul and Petronilla's behalf, and this whole thing is absolutely idiotic. But, rich people and their wars, I guess they can just do, they have the time for it. And let's be honest, they love it. Okay, I'm going to grab a marker or two. I want some really color to pop out of here. So, the end of the war actually came because of an extremely tragic event that happened 2 years later in 1144. By then, the royal army, Louis's army, was occupying Champagne, France, Theobald's holdings. And so they had, taken over the city, is basically what that means. But they were still fighting. And so 1,000 people or so, around that number, ran into a church for sanctuary, and the church was set on fire, and everybody inside the church died. So over 1,000 people, or around 1,000 people, died that day. And Louis was horrified, which I guess is a good thing. I mean, like, that he felt that way and wasn't, like, pleased by it or something, because he wasn't, inherently a bad guy. So he had the decency to be appalled and upset and, really regretful of what happened and everything. So, I mean, I guess that makes it a little better. Let me dig around in my marker box if I'm looking for a certain color. There it is. Alright, so after that, Louis decided it was time to chill out and make peace with Theobald in exchange for lifting the interdict on Raoul and Petronilla's marriage. So, Theobald agrees, and he's like, okay, all right, okay, cool, we can make peace for a little bit. I'll get my land back. You get to kind of absolve yourself of 1,000 people's murder, I guess, and everything will be all cool between us. And so Louis's army leaves Champagne, and it's handed back over to Theobald, and Theobald moves back in, and then he reneges on everything once he has his land back. And so, you know, he put the interdict back into place, and when Raoul refused to put Petronella aside and take back Eleanor, Theobald's sister, the fighting started all over again, and Louis went back to Champagne and, you know, just wreaked havoc again on the city. You know, like the poor people of the city, you know, the main population, they don't have any say in any of this crap, and so, but they certainly are caught in the middle of it, you know. Ugh. But yeah, I mean, honestly though, Theobald was never going to say, yeah, okay, you can totally set my sister aside. He clearly cared very much, and I don't know if it was out of love for his sister or if he had some sort of stake in it or whatever. Like, maybe he refused to give her dowry back to the family if he was setting her aside, or, you know, something like that. I don't know. But anyway, that's what was going down, and all of this was because, you know, Raoul and Petronella couldn't keep their hands off of each other, and it wasn't good enough to have her as a mistress, I guess, because she was, you know, so important as a daughter of Aquitaine that, you know, she couldn't really afford for her reputation to suffer without being married. But I mean, this this didn't keep things under wraps. I mean, everybody knew what was going on, and her and Raoul still seemed to really not care. They wanted to be together. Ugh. It's, you know, it was a weird and gross time where child brides were more prevalent than they are now, because they're still prevalent now, just more so back then. Alright, we're not going to talk about all that right now. Okay. Alright, so, this is about the time that Eleanor... Sorry, I'm trying to move my paperwork, and I'm just scratching around on the board, because I can't get it to come up. There we go. This is about the time that Eleanor and Louis are going to meet Bernard, Bernard of Clairvaux, and he's the abbot of Clairvaux Abbey, and later he will be Saint Bernard. Yeah, that one. But for now, abbot. And Eleanor is doing her queen/duchess stuff and decided to speak to him to negotiate peace between the Pope, Theobald, and Louis, because she has had it. Like, you know, this is her sister and everything, but she wants peace. She's tired of probably being blamed for the stuff with the Pope too, even though she was directly involved with the Raoul Petronella situation. She's the whole reason Louis got involved in that. Otherwise, I think what he would have done is not sided with Raoul in that situation. He would have told him to go back to his wife, you know, if he wasn't married to Eleanor. And give her hair a little bit darker boost. At this point, I'm just adding color layer, because I've got a lot more to tell you guys. So, you know, they are talking and everything, and she mentions a peace between the Pope and Louis and everything, and Bernard of Clairvaux is like, oh my God, literally, my God, did you as a woman just speak to me about men's concerns? And so I'm sure immediately, because she had dealt with this for years now, she was like, oh, okay, you're one of those, so I have to talk to you this certain way. So then she was like, oh, no, 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 you misunderstand me. You see, I want peace in the realm so that Louis and I can keep trying for more children, because I desire more children. We need a male heir for the throne, and I cannot do my duty because he is always at war, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. He's so pious, he won't have sex with me, all the things. And she kind of strokes his ego and does the whole, like, I'm only asking because I need babies. But really, I'm sure she had her own motives that were absolutely nothing to do with children or babies or anything like that. They were political, they were strategic, and all that. But this immediately works on Bernard. He's like, oh, you poor thing. You just have baby fever, and, I understand what you're saying about Louis being gone at war or him not having sex with you, and, that's terrible, you poor thing. It is definitely still your fault because you are the woman. But let me tell you, I'm going to help you. And so they kind of formed a little friendship over the years. And, I think that Eleanor was so used to how to handle self-important men that, she was able to break that down in him, because later, he would realize how smart she was and everything, how well she knew how to play the game and all that. So anyway, that's how they make that friendship. And so after that, after she sweet talks him, she ends up getting exactly what she wants. He puts forth the negotiation with the Pope, and Louis and the Pope and Theobald come to a truce, and Louis gets to be brought back into the church, and they're happy, and things are going great. And even though Eleanor gets absolutely no credit for it, she orchestrated the whole thing. And she got exactly what she wanted. And she even got the abbot of Clairvaux, Bernard, to talk to Louis about how, he was actually sinning by not trying to make more children with Eleanor, and how he needed to, give that a shot again. And he listened for a while, like he always would when Eleanor would try to get a church guy to intervene on her behalf in this regard. And they would, and he would get better for a little while and then go back to his own ways, like after one time of, hopping into bed with her. And so that, at this point, they only have the one daughter, Marie. But, after this peace is negotiated and everything, the Pope wants Louis, and Louis wants to go on crusade, kind of as a repentance, but the Pope has like other business that he wants Louis to handle there too. He wants him to, kind of come to a guy's rescue and clean up a mess here and there, and, fight a battle here and there and all that. I don't know. I think it's kind of like busy work, but also when a ruler went on crusade, their lands were protected from anybody invading and taking over and all that. So the Pope would not recognize them as the ruler. Like, you couldn't go on conquest and invade France and get the Pope's backing, which was very important back then. So their lands were protected by papal order when they went on crusade. And they were also ruled a lot more by the Pope. They had their advisors and regents and everything there in France, but the Pope had a lot more say about what went on in France at the time, or any other country where the ruler is on crusade. And back then it happened more than it does like a couple hundred years later. Well, the crusades kind of end a little while later, but kings going into battle themselves happened earlier, and once you're getting into later times, they become more commanders that step back. But anyway, that's not important here. So, Eleanor handles that beautifully. She gets the peace resolved and everything, and then she's, Louis is going to go on crusade, and Eleanor vows she's going on crusade too. And her and Louis kind of fight about this at first, and he's like, no, you have to stay here. And she's like, well, if I have to stay here, I'm not sending any of my army with you. And really, at this point, the army was the Aquitanians. I mean, France had some of their own, but the biggest part of it was made up with Aquitanian troops. And if Eleanor told them not to go, they would not go. Louis knew it. His advisors knew it. This was a big issue for them, the advisors and Louis, because they definitely wanted more control over Aquitaine than they had. But they, even if they tried to exert that control, they simply would not comply. And, you know, Aquitaine was richer and better armed and all of that than the King of France even was. So they knew they couldn't really go up against them in battle and just had to deal with it. So anyway, Eleanor says, if I can't go, my army can't go. So eventually Louis and his advisors, you know, agree to let her tag along, and she takes, you know, the cross herself and does like a little ceremony and vows and all that. And this isn't like, oh, we're gonna go and we're headed off next week, bye. This is, we're going in a couple of years because we have to prepare for it, which means they have to raise money for it, which I'm sure in this specific instance that she probably funded most of this crusade, or Aquitaine did, because you could kind of raise taxes on your subjects and everything and have them fund it, and it really messed with people and pissed them off because it was, you know, their people going, because, you know, Aquitaine was very much, we take care of our own, but they were also in the same breath very much, we will fight our own too. And they were constantly fighting each other, and taxes and uprisings and disagreements and land disputes and marriage disputes, clearly, and all that. So none of this was unusual when she was getting Louis to back her with Theobald and all of that. That was just par for the course of Aquitanians fighting over stuff. And I don't think Louis understood that. I think he thought it was like a bigger deal than she thought it was. Anyway, so in reality, she is probably the one funding most, if not all, of this crusade. And some taxes were probably raised in France and the other territories and everything to do that with. And so, yeah, they spend the next 2 years getting ready to and go to crusade and all that. Let me catch up in my notes here. So, yeah, in June of 1147 is when they set out for the crusade, and Eleanor and her ladies were, like, super excited, and she was looking forward to, like, travel and an adventure, and it's going to be so fun. And, you know, they knew that parts of, you know, where they were going, the Middle East, were very beautiful countries and had, like, very lavish palaces and expensive wares and exotic fabrics and jewelry and, you know, art and all of that. So I think that she was looking forward to, like, sightseeing and shopping and basically getting, like, spa glam vacation treatment. And to Louis, this was like an attempt at repenting for his sins and conducting the Pope's business with the military guys and all that. But another reason she was so excited is because her Uncle Raymond lived in Antioch, which is modern-day Iraq, around that area. So she was very excited to see her Uncle Raymond, because he's not much older than her. He's only about 8 or 9 years old, much older than her, and so she's very excited about seeing him, because really her only family she has left is Petronilla. And no, I don't think Petronilla was on this trip. And all the research I did, it never mentioned that Petronilla was on this crusade with them, so I don't think she went. But this journey is going to take them a long time. Like, they're not just going to leave France and be in the Middle East in like a couple of days. It takes months, like almost a year, for them to get there. And along the way, her and Louis are fighting. They are having a time of it getting long because she's wanting to basically treat it as a vacation, but also she would have been more serious if she'd been allowed to, but she wasn't allowed to as a woman. She wasn't expected to have like military input, political input, and things like that. And the Aquitanians were still only taking orders from her, and also, like, I don't know, it seemed like they were better prepared for the journey than the French army was, because, you know, you have to think, these are thousands of people, the royal party and all of their entourage and everything, and then it's all the soldiers and the military that they're bringing along. So there's just a bunch of people, you know, and they're going a long ways away. And, you know, Eleanor is not about to not travel in comfort and style, so she's definitely packing a ton of shit to go with her. I'm sure her ladies in waiting packed a bunch of stuff, and so that's only adding to the amount of stuff they're having to carry. And of course, you can bet that even though Eleanor was probably funding most of this crusade and most of her army was going and everything, that people complained and blamed her about how much luggage she brought. Although, you know, like, her maybe 2 to 5 carts of stuff made all the difference between the thousands and hundreds of other carts that they brought to pull, you know, military equipment and food and the comforts for everyone else in the party, you know. But no, it was all Eleanor's fault, of course, which I think she had gotten so used to hearing at this point, she didn't even care anymore. I'm going to let this dry for a second. I feel like it's wet. So let me catch up in my notes. Thing about, you know, Eleanor and Louis is he was dull and drab and, you know, so worried about the religious aspects of life that he wasn't enjoying life, and Eleanor was enjoying life, and so that was part of their clash. Their relationship and marriage was on public display. You know, she's being blamed for Louis not producing heirs with her. She's being blamed for the political climate. She's being blamed for, you know, a strong wind knocks down a tree and it's her fault, you know? I mean, it was very classic misogyny that everybody blamed everything on her and it was always her fault. Yes, she did have her faults, but there was some stuff that was literally beyond her control and she had nothing to do with, and she was still blamed for it. But she made her own fun. Like, she knew that no matter what she did, she couldn't do anything right. So I think she gave up trying after a few years and just decided to have fun. She might as well. She might as well enjoy her life. And so she did that, and she did it wherever she went. And by all accounts, she was a lot of fun to be around. And Louis, like I said, he's dull as dishwater, but he's also terrible at military strategy and politics. He is, you know, more inclined to listen to somebody based on, you know, how they feel than what makes strategical sense. And the people who are telling him to do stuff based on what they feel are doing it based on serving their own self-interest. So that has been causing him a lot of issues on this trip. And not just that, but, you know, they're in the Middle East, you know, they are used to invaders coming from the West and just starting a war to gain their own glory. So, of course, people knew they were coming. and were prepared for it. And they also knew that they had a lot of supplies and money with them and gold and all that stuff. So it would have been nice to be able to rob them as well. And so they were ambushed and attacked a couple of times on their way to the Middle East. And they had bouts of sickness and, weather disasters. And it was a very treacherous trip. And that's why, partly why, anyway, it took so long, is because just crazy stuff kept happening to them along the way. And it takes them, close to a year to make it there. And, these trips are very serious back then. Like, you gotta seriously be all in, which lots of kings would take up the cross and then never go on crusade. But Louis did it because he was serious about repenting. And he, in his mind, the Pope had given him a list of things he wanted him to accomplish in there, and not one of them was retaking Jerusalem, because pretty much everybody at this point already knew that that was not going to happen ever. But that was Louis's goal, and he really didn't do or accomplish any of the things that the Pope sent him there to do. So the Pope was, going to be pretty pissed off too. But we haven't gotten that far yet. I mean, I just gave you a little spoiler alert. But so they're all going down there with different agendas, is what I'm getting at. There's the Pope's agenda, there's Louis's agenda, and there's Eleanor's agenda. And not a single one of them line up. And like I said, they're getting ambushed, they're getting attacked, and it's hot, and people are getting sick, and it's not as romantic as Eleanor thought it was going to be. I don't think it's as easy as Louis thought it was going to be. I think Louis expected to be, victorious the second he stepped on, Jerusalem territory, and for everybody to just be thrilled he was there and, basically lay down their swords and bend the knee. But that's not what happened, which, I mean, they could barely even get there without getting attacked and ambushed and everything. And if it wasn't for the Aquitanian army, they probably all would have been killed. So they finally meet up with Raymond of Antioch after being attacked shortly outside of his territory and everything. And just in general, having a rough go of it, getting to their destinations and everything. Well, Louis was in a big hurry to go, take Jerusalem and appease God and everything, and he didn't want to stay in Antioch very long. He wanted to go on and do his thing. And, Raymond has his own battles going on in Antioch at the time, and that he literally battles that he's actually going out and fighting himself and everything, and winning some, losing some, that sort of thing. And Eleanor told Louis, fine, go, because they did stay in Antioch for a little while, but then he's ready to go. She's not. She tells him, you go ahead, I'm going to stay here. And he says no, and then he has her kidnapped and then taken out of the city. And he takes her on with him because he's headed to Jerusalem and wants her to go. That, there's a bigger part of that story. But we're going to breeze through it because this episode is getting very long already. But anyway, he kidnaps her and takes her with him to Jerusalem. And she is pretty pissed off about it, which makes everything worse, and they're fighting even more, and yada yada, blah blah, all that. So, but during all this time, that's when rumors start that her and her Uncle Raymond were having an affair. Excuse me. If you're not familiar with medieval history, accusing people of incest was very common as a political smear strategy, but it usually wasn't true, except for the fact that like people were marrying their cousins and things like that all the time, and as long as you got a papal dispensation, it was fine. So people were doing like church sanctioned incest all the time, marrying first, second, third cousins. But there is a thing called the law of consanguinity, which means of being too closely related. And this is what you go to the Pope for, to get dispensation. Lots of former royals have had it. If Isabella the First of Castile and Ferdinand were, I believe, first cousins, I think. Actually, I think their fathers were brothers. But anyway, I could be wrong. They could have been second cousins. But anyway, you know, they were extremely closely related and all that. So the Pope can give a papal dispensation, which makes it all okay. And they hadn't done that. And it was believed that if your marriage went badly back then, and it was because you were too closely related, God would not give you a son. And so I think Raymond must have planted this idea in Eleanor's head, because she starts telling Louis this. She's like, you know, we're never going to have a son. Our marriage is cursed because we're too closely related. I believe they were third cousins or something like that. Like her aunt's grandma was something, I can't remember. But anyway, so she starts kind of planting that little seed. And at first, you know, Louis is stressed and he's busy and he's kind of just putting it aside, whatever. But his little trip to try and get to Jerusalem doesn't work out at all. His men and forces are defeated quickly, and it's just bad, and the whole thing ends up being a total loss and everything. And so finally, after a couple of years there, they decide they're going to go home. Going home isn't as easy as it sounds. Like, going home means we're going to spend the next year or more traveling back to France. So they do try to do this on a boat, which will make it go somewhat faster. But they're fighting so much at this point that they're traveling on separate boats. Like, they don't even want to be near each other. And unfortunately for both of them, they end up going through rough weather and more ambushes, and they get separated. And it's like, it takes so long for them to be found again that they're even presumed dead at one point. And Eleanor is going to wash up on the shores of Palermo, and Roger II of Sicily is going to take her in for a while and all that. And in the meantime, like, she has no idea where Louis is, if he is dead or alive. But whenever she reaches Roger of Sicily, that's when she finds out that she's presumed dead, and they have been, because they've been missing and out of reach with their people for, like, you know, a couple of months at this point. So she finally gets word that Louis has landed. He was, you know, knocked off course and everything as well, and Louis has landed in Calabria, and Eleanor goes to, you know, meet back up with him there, because, well, they haven't seen each other in a couple of months. They didn't know if the other one was dead or alive, so I imagine that kind of pushed the fighting out of the way, especially since they weren't in contact. But instead of going straight home, Louis decides that they're going to go to Rome. They're going to stop off there, because they're already right there in Italy, so they might as well stop off in Rome. And he's been thinking about what she's been saying. See, she's smart. She planted that seed about consanguinity, and he hasn't seen her in a couple of months. And, you know, after she says that, God sends this storm that separates them and everything. And he sees it as a sign like, oh gosh, you know, she's right. We're too closely related. I'm never going to have a son. Maybe I should ask the Pope for an annulment. They didn't really call it a divorce back then. They just called it an annulment. And the Pope, being the Pope, does his little popey things, and he says, oh no, you guys, shouldn't you try to work it out first? And I don't know if this was something a lot of popes did, or if it was just this guy's particular personality, but he's like, I'm gonna set you guys up on a little date night. I'm gonna have y'all sleep here at the Vatican. You're gonna share a room. It's gonna be romantic. I'm gonna make sure that, like, you both aren't interrupted, and you can, you know, have your maritals and get it on and get it freaky and make a French prince. And Eleanor was probably thinking, ew. And Louis was probably, like, horrified, embarrassed, and nervous and worried. So they end up doing what they're expected to, because at this time they'll probably check the sheets to see if anything happened. I know it's gross. We're not going to get into that. But anyway, you know, they go through with it because they really don't have a choice. And the Pope tells them, you know, go back to France, work on your marriage, has a little talk with Louis about his conjugal duties as a husband and producing heirs and his part in it, and Louis says he'll do better. And, you know, he just knows that God is going to bless their union there at the Vatican with a son. And a little bit later, Eleanor does find out she's pregnant. Yay! But her and Louis had talked a little bit, and probably his advisors and all of that, that if this baby wasn't a boy, then they would get the annulment. Because they were still fighting quite a bit. Like, you know, when they went back home and they finally got home, they resumed their usual stance on things and disagreements and bickering and all that. So she was tired of it. She was ready for the marriage to end, and she was probably very glad when later on she gave birth to a girl, Alex. And for Louis, that was kind of it. Like, he felt then and there that God was indeed angry and not going to give him a son with Eleanor. And so he finally agrees, because, you know, he does still love Eleanor, but, you know, he needs an heir. The pressure is on, and she's been a lot of trouble, and though he doesn't want to let her go, he decides to finally agree to an annulment, and they get an annulment. But, so here's how it works. Usually when there's an annulment, the children are illegitimized. That didn't happen here. They were still considered princesses and legitimate and all of that. And unfortunately for Eleanor and the girls, Louis would retain custody. There's no family courts back then, and the Pope just sort of decided things on the terms and awarded Louis custody of the girls. And Eleanor had absolutely no recourse in that and no say in it, and nothing was going to change about that because Louis was pretty pissed off and wanted to exert control over her, because all of the authority, rights, and control reverted back to Eleanor immediately, to Aquitaine. And so basically, like, he got to keep the kids, but she got to keep the duchy. And so she heads home. on her way home, classic, there's 2 different attempts to kidnap her. And one was by Theobald V, the Count of Blois, and then Geoffrey, the Count of Nantes. Geoffrey, the Count of Nantes, is the son, I believe the middle son, of Empress Matilda and her husband Geoffrey Plantagenet. So Empress Matilda's second son had just attempted to kidnap Eleanor for the purpose of marrying her and being in charge of Aquitaine. And it didn't work. Luckily, both attempts from Theobald and Geoffrey did not work, and she was able to escape and get safely ensconced in her home in Aquitaine. And so what she did from there, and I suspect this was something pre-planned, she sends the Duke of Normandy and Anjou a letter saying, "Come on, dude, get down here. We're getting married." And this was Empress Matilda's oldest son, Henry. And so he heads to Aquitaine, and within 6 weeks of her annulment from Louis, she is then married to Henry, Duke of Normandy and Anjou, and heir apparent to be King of England. And so that's kind of where I'm going to end it. I'll be doing a second episode that talks about the life of Eleanor, I'll be talking about, in a different episode, Eleanor's life after she marries Henry, because she goes from being Queen of France to being Queen of England. Because not long after she marries Henry, he becomes King of England. And if you haven't listened to, go back and listen to Empress Matilda. That whole thing is the events leading up to Henry becoming King of England. And Empress Matilda is the mother-in-law to Eleanor. Even though Eleanor is about 11 years older than Henry, but Empress Matilda is Eleanor's mother-in-law. So, both extraordinary women. And this, just so you know, getting married 6 weeks after, and Henry had been one of Louis's most pain in the ass subjects, and for her to marry him, and Normandy being so important and like the second biggest territory under French rule, but in control by somebody else, it was really not good news for Louis that Aquitaine and Normandy were about to join forces, and England. So that was going to complicate things for Louis. And he was also just kind of like, jealous and upset because she moved on so quickly and remarried, and somebody younger, better looking, better liked, stronger, wittier, charming, was well known for being a ladies' man, which I think is a really gross thing to say, but that's what they would say back then, and so, there are just a whole lot of drama there, and it's going to be another longer episode, so I'm going to end this here. This is Eleanor's life up to now, and so she is just freshly divorced, newly married, and we'll pick up from right there at that point, because from the jump, their marriage is just chaos, go, 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 so much to do, so much going on. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. We'll go through the rest of Eleanor's life. If you liked what you saw, give me a like, leave me a comment. If you have questions, comments, or anything like that, let me know. Give me the subscribe if you really liked what you saw. I'm sorry I can't talk today. I need a drink of water. My mouth is getting very dry. But thanks for joining me, and I'll hope to see you soon. It'll probably be just a little bit before I get back to Eleanor's story, but I will definitely do that here in the coming weeks, and I'll let you know what happens with her and her life. And it's very interesting, and I hope to see you again. Thanks. Bye.